A mass murderer killed 76 people in Norway, and he wrote a 1,500-page manifesto to justify it. I spent the weekend reading those rants. I'll tell you about it tonight on The Source. Anders Behring Breivik, a 32-year-old man from Oslo, has confessed to murdering 76 of his fellow Norwegians, 8 people in downtown Oslo with a car bomb, and 68 young liberal activists that he gunned down on a small island before police showed up 90 minutes later. Breivik surrendered to police immediately and made his first court appearance today. Breivik didn't just confess. He boasted about his deeds. It was something he'd been planning for months, even years. Just before he set out on his murder spree, he emailed thousands of people a copy of this, his rambling 1,500-page, 770,000-word manifesto. I'll tell you more about that screed in a moment. But first, let's go back to Friday. The car bomb blast outside the Prime Minister's office in downtown Oslo made instant international news. And almost as quickly, a Muslim terrorist group called Ansar al-Jihad al-Alami, which means helpers of the global jihad, well, they took credit. This was believable, given that since 9/11, literally thousands of terrorist acts have been committed by jihadists. And more to the point, who on earth would falsely take credit for murdering innocent people? But this time, it wasn't a Muslim terrorist group. It was the work of a lone madman, although today, Breivik told a judge there are 2 other cells of activists also operating. Whether or not that's true remains to be seen, or whether it's part of Breivik's bizarre mind. In his manifesto, he says he's a member of the Knights Templar, a defunct medieval order of soldiers that fought the Crusades, but was disbanded 800 years ago. He calls himself a Justiciar Knight Commander of Knights Templar Europe. He even talks about Dan Brown's conspiracy theory novels about the Christian church. His rambling manifesto is full of such disconnects from reality. He even calls it 2083, a European Declaration of Independence, in which his murder spree in Norway starts a global revolution. He's a delusional murderer who actually thinks he's a hero. He actually called himself, quote, a perfect example which should be copied, applauded, and celebrated. The perfect knight I have always strived to be. So he thinks he's a knight. He thinks knights go and kill innocent people with car bombs and at summer camps. I read through Breivik's sewer pipe of a manifesto on the weekend. Half of it is cut and paste essays and speeches written by other people, ranging from the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, to Winston Churchill and Gandhi, to modern-day conservative bloggers. Now, obviously, much of what he quotes was thoughtful and valid in its original context. I mean, this murderer doesn't make Churchill worse, but Breivik has turned these words into justification for him to murder people today. In his revolutionary plan, he says that tens of thousands, 45,000 people, in fact, of innocent people must be murdered for his plan to succeed. So a murderer quotes Gandhi. So a fascist quotes Churchill. A Satanist calls himself a Christian soldier of the Knights Templar. And let's stop right there for a moment, because as news broke on Friday that the Muslim terrorists who claimed responsibility were lying and that someone else was responsible, there was a palpable shift in the coverage in the mainstream media. Take Canada's government broadcaster, the CBC. The CBC is always loath to use the phrase Muslim terrorist. They think it's too politically incorrect and too judgmental. They actually have a policy to discourage the use of the phrase terrorist. So they were positively relieved. No, that's not even the word. They were thrilled that the mass murder here was done by someone who wasn't Muslim. So who was it done by? I mean, this time they were thrilled to jump the gun to tell you his religion. Look at this clip.
This is the prime suspect. He's a 32-year-old fundamentalist Christian with apparently allegedly strong views about Muslims and immigration. He's described as a 32-year-old fundamentalist Christian. He is described as right-wing, a Christian fundamentalist, and having anti-Muslim views.
Already known as a fundamentalist Christian who chose to be baptized at 15.
A suspected Christian fundamentalist is charged in the attacks, but police are now investigating the possibility he didn't act alone.
Wow, a Christian killing people because he hated Islam. That was their new narrative, except for that Breivik didn't actually kill any Muslims. He went after the Norwegian government and its ruling Liberal Party. And the Christian part, he hadn't been to church since he was a teenager. I did a word search through his entire 770,000-word manifesto for words like church, Jesus, Christian, prayer, etc. He talked a lot about the Crusades and about the treatment of Christian minorities under Islam, but he himself wasn't religious at all, let alone a Christian fundamentalist like the CBC says he is. Here are some quotes from his nutty manifesto. Here's the first one. Regarding my personal relationship with God, I guess I'm not an excessively religious man. I'm first and foremost a man of logic. However, I'm a supporter of monocultural Christian Europe. That's it. He calls white Europe Christian Europe. That's basically his shorthand. His second one says, if you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ and God, then you are a religious Christian. Myself, and many more like me, do not necessarily have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ and God. We do, however, believe in Christianity as a cultural, social identity and moral platform. This makes us Christian. So the mass murder in Norway, I mean, it's a horrendous crime. It's also a terrible tragedy, and Breivik wanted to use that crime and tragedy to spark a bizarre fantasy outcome where other so-called knights would rise up and murder thousands of others and set up some racially segregated world, a bizarre place that, according to him, would even have free sex zones, would have Jews kicked out of Europe and sent to Israel, and Muslims kicked out and sent back to Arabia. I mean, his book drips with theories of racial purity and apartheid. Breivik needs to be punished for sure, but last he committed his crime in Norway, and he'll be out of jail in about 21 years, or about 90 days per murder victim. But that's a small point, but it's always worth noting. I mean, Norway's soft-on-crime laws means he surely won't be properly punished, and their strict gun control meant that it took a full 90 minutes for Breivik's rampage to end before police arrived, because no one else nearby was armed. But here's where Breivik's crimes have been transformed from a local tragedy, from a terrible mass murder, and from the ravings of a lunatic, into the greatest political opportunity that liberals have had in years. Because as that CBC video clip a moment ago showed, left-wing opportunists now have their poster boy, a non-Muslim terrorist, a Christian fundamentalist, in the words of the CBC, that they can now use as a counterexample whenever anyone is concerned about the war on terror, about 9/11, about Al-Qaeda, about the PLO, about the Taliban, about the 10,000 or more Muslim terrorist attacks in the past 10 years, from the London subways to Bali to Beslan, Russia. They now have their talking point to undermine the war on Islamic terror. But that's not even the main goal of the CBC and their kind. They want to discredit some of the ideas that Breivik footnoted in his 770,000-word ramble. Like I say, he quoted from liberals like Charles Darwin and Richard Dawkins and environmentalists like the Unabomber. But his main thesis was his worry about radical Islam in the West. And that's what the CBC and their friends want to do. They want to associate being concerned about radical Islam and the treatment of women in Islam and the treatment of gays in Islam with this mass murderer. They want to delegitimize peaceful, reasonable, liberal discussions of these matters by tainting them with this murderer. You can feel it in the daily press coverage already. You can see it in the calls for limits on free speech that have started to emerge. You can feel it in the condemnations of some of the writers quoted by Breivik, as if his endorsement of them meant their endorsement of him. After the Unabomber killed people in the name of environmentalism, no one seriously blamed Al Gore. But after Breivik killed his fellow Norwegians, you're seeing global condemnations of conservatives, as if Breivik's unconservative violence was their doing. Anders Behring Breivik is a mass murderer and a deluded narcissist who thinks he's a knight. But to leftists like the CBC, he's a chance to smear legitimate conservatives by cherry-picking from his long rant to suit their purpose. That's why the CBC is lusting after this story with such an unseemly jubilation. It's their answer to 9/11. It's proof of Christianity's evil and conservatism's evil. They're wrong. It's proof of Breivik's evil. Nothing more.